Welcome to Yehoshua's Daf Yomi Shiur, where the Daf continues daily until the complete revelation of Mashiach ben David, Messiah the son of David. Today we'll be studying Tractate Chullin, page 90, starting with A on the top, with the words Alma Isur Mukdashin Kadim. Evidently, the limbs of the body are formed before the nerves and sinews, and therefore the prohibition of eating sacrificial animals precedes the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve. Afal gav isur mukdashin kadim, asi isur gid chayil alayhu, shekain isuro noheg bevnei Noach. The Gemara answers, even though the prohibition of eating sacrificial animals precedes the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve, the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve comes and takes effect upon the offspring of consecrated animals, because the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve adds an extra stringency in that it applies also to the descendants of Noah. The prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve was in effect from the time Jacob wrestled with the angel. See Genesis 32:25 through 33, before the Torah was given. At that time, Jacob and his sons had the status of descendants of Noah, meaning Gentiles. Therefore, the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve is broader than the prohibition of eating meat of sacrificial animals, which took effect only when the Torah was given. Man shamas lehai svara, Rabbi Yehuda, the Hamas Nisin, the Lok Rabbi Yehuda Diktani, Noheg bebehema buchaya b'yerach shel yamin, v'yerach shel small. The Gemara challenges this answer. Whom did you hear holds in accordance with this reasoning? Is Rabbi Yehuda, cited in a letter, a Mishnah, in a later Mishnah, 100b. But the Mishnah here is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as it teaches that the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve applies to domesticated animals, and to domesticated animals, to the thigh of the right leg, and to the thigh of the left leg. By contrast, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the prohibition applies only with regard to the sciatic nerve in the thigh of one leg. See 90b. Hai Tanas Savar La Kavase Bechada Pligala Bechada. The Gemara explains the Tana of this Mishnah holds in accordance with the opinion of Yehuda with regard to one halacha, meaning that the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve applies to the descendants of Noah, and disagrees with his opinion with regard to one halacha, and holds that the prohibition applies to the sciatic nerve of both legs. Amar de Shamas le Rabbi Yehuda b'Timea the Isur Lav Kadashim Isur Kares Mi Shamas le. The Gemara challenges. Some say that you heard Rabbi Yehuda rules that the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve takes effect, in addition to the prohibition with regard to a non-kosher animal, which is a prohibition punishable by lashes. Since the prohibition of the sciatic nerve is broader in that it applies to the descendants of Noah, takes effect even though the animal is already prohibited as being not kosher. But in the case of sacrificial animals, whose consumption by an impure person is a prohibition punishable by karet, did you hear that Rabbi Yehuda considers the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve more stringent, such that it takes effect even though the animal is already prohibited? Therefore, this answer is rejected. Elohachi bimakeres askinan divarechem kadosh. The Gemara offers an alternative answer. Rather, here in the Mishnah, we are dealing with a non-sacred animal giving birth to its firstborn, which becomes sanctified as it leaves the womb. The Mishnah teaches that although the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve does not apply to the offspring of sacrificial animals, because their sacrificial status renders them prohibited for consumption before the prohibition of the sciatic nerve takes effect, that is not the case with regard to a firstborn. The sanctified status of a firstborn takes effect only as it leaves the womb, which is after the prohibition of the sciatic nerve takes effect. V'boyes ema vlados kadashim Yaviyasan hin kadoshim. And if you wish to say instead that the Mishnah is dealing with the offspring of all sacrificial animals, and this Tana holds that such animals are sanctified only when they come into being as independent creatures at birth, consequently, the prohibition of the sciatic nerve takes effect before the animal becomes prohibited at the time of his birth. Or, according to the opinion that the sciatic nerve is permitted in a fetus, the two prohibitions take effect simultaneously. Having addressed the need for the Mishnah to state that the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve applies with regard to sacrificial animals, the Gemara discusses which types of sacrificial animals are included in this prohibition. Yehoshua says the sages taught that the prohibition of the sciatic nerve applies only with regard to sacrificial animals that are eaten. For example, sin offerings, guilt offerings, and peace offerings. But with regard to sacrificial animals that are not eaten, for example, burnt offerings, the prohibition of the sciatic nerve does not apply. And Rabbi Yochanan says the prohibition of the sciatic nerve never applies both with regard to sacrificial animals that are eaten and with regard to sacrificial animals that are not eaten. Amar Papa v'lo kan lehalakoso kan lehaloso. Papa said, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan do not disagree. They're merely referring to different cases. Here, Rabbi Yochanan says that the prohibition of the sciatic nerve applies with regard to flogging one who eats it. There, Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef says that the prohibition of the sciatic nerve does not apply with regard to bringing the meat of the animal up to the altar, meaning offerings that are burned on the altar are brought up with the sciatic nerve. Burning the sciatic nerve on the altar is not comparable to eating it and is not prohibited. Ikar di Amri, Amar of Papa, V'lo pligi kan lechotzu kan aloso. There are those who say that Rav Papa said as follows. Rabbi Bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan do not disagree. They're merely referring to different cases. Here, Rabbi Bar Yosef says that the prohibition of the sciatic nerve does not apply to burnt offerings in that one is not required to remove it before burning the offering on the altar. There, Rabbi Yochanan says that the prohibition does apply, in that if one did remove the sciatic nerve, it is prohibited to bring it up on the altar independently. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar lo sopligi Tanya v'hiktir kohen esakol hamizbecha l'rabois hatzamos agidin v'agidin v'karnaim v'hatelafaim. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak disagreed with Republicans and Rabbi Bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan disagree with regard to whether it's permitted to bring up the sciatic nerve to the altar, even when it remains in the thigh. And it is taught in the Braita in the verse, and the priest shall make it all smoke on the altar, Leviticus 1:9. The term "it all" serves to include the bones and the sinews and the horns and the hooves among those items burned on the altar. Okay. Yachal afilu perishot lomar v'asisa alasecha abasar v'yadam. One might have thought that even if they became detached from the flesh of the burnt offering, they are burned on the altar. Therefore, the verse states, "And you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord your God." Deuteronomy 12:27, indicating that only the flesh and the blood are offered on the altar. I basar adam yachol yachalot gidim v'yatzamos ya'ale basar l'gabi mizbeach Talmud lomar v'yiktira kohen es hakol mizbecha haketzad b'mechubarin yalu perishu afilu v'rosh mizbeach yerdu. The Braita continues, if it is only the flesh and the blood that are offered on the altar, one might have thought that the priest must first remove the sinews and bones from an offering, and only then may he bring up the flesh to be burned upon the altar. Therefore, the verse states, "And the priest shall make it all smoke on the altar, including the sinews and bones." How can these texts be reconciled? If the sinews and bones are attached to the flesh, they shall ascend. If they became detached from the flesh, then even if they are already at the top of the altar, they shall descend. Uman tanan deshamas le damar perishu yerdu mechiyehi tanya v'yiktira kohen es hakol nerabois es ha'atzomos v'hagidim v'hakardayim v'hatlavim afilu perishu. The Gemara comments, and who is the Tana that you heard who said, if they became detached from the flesh, they shall descend? It is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as is taught in the Braita, in the verse that states, "And the priest shall make it all smoke on the altar." The term "it all" serves to include the bones, the sinews, and the thorns, and the hooves among those items burned on the altar. And that is the halacha, even if they became detached from the flesh of the offering. Ma'ani mekayim es Yisrael lesecha v'basar adam v'poki'in haketzad yikol basar atamachzir v'iyat tamachzir yikol gidim v'atzamos. The Braita continues, but if so, how do I realize the meaning of the verse, "And you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord your God," Deuteronomy 12:27, which indicates that only the flesh and blood of an offering are offered on the altar. It is referring to parts of the offering that become dislodged from the fire. How so? If the partially consumed flesh of a burnt offering is dislodged from the altar, you return it to the fire, but you do not return the partially consumed sinews and bones that become dislodged. Rabbi Omer, Kasav Echad Omer, Yiktir Kohen Es Hakol, Riba Kasav Echad Omer, Asil Asecha Basar Adam, Miet HaKetzad mechubarin yalu perishu afil b'rosh shemizbeach yerdu. The Brisa continues, or Yehuda Hanasi says, that one verse states, and the priest shall make it all smoke on the altar, which included sinews and bones. And one verse states, and you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, which excluded any part other than the flesh and the blood. How can these texts be reconciled? If the sinews and bones were attached to the flesh, they shall ascend. If they became detached from the flesh, then even if they are already on top of the altar, they shall descend. B'Rabbanan, b'mechubarin lo yitzrich kra. Raboye midei dahavi aroshe shel ola ki yitzrich kra the perishu. The Gemara explains their dispute, and the rabbis hold, with regard to sinews and bones that are attached to the flesh, it was not necessary for a verse to include the obligation to bring them up to the altar. It is clear that they must be brought up, just as it is the halacha at the head of a burnt offering, which contains many bones, is brought up, as stated explicitly in the verse, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall lay the pieces and the head and the fat in order upon the wood that is on the fire that is upon the altar. Leviticus 1:8. When a verse was necessary, it was for the case where the sinews and bones became detached from the flesh. Consequently, when the verse uses the inclusive phrase "it all," it is to include sinews and bones that became detached. V'Rebbi b'mechubarin de'etero, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds that with regard to sinews and bones that are attached to the flesh and that are permitted to be eaten. We're turning now to 90b, top of the page. Okay, turning to 90b, top of the page. Let's see. You know what? I think we'll stop here for now. Yeah, we'll stop here.